They said I got it all wrong again. I opened the recording from last week. Their voices sounded exactly the same, but the words were different. Mom said I was remembering dinner wrong. I said I remembered her words about college. She looked at Dad. Dad shook his head. They said I was mixing up days, that it was a different conversation. I sat there. I heard every word. Mom said I was too sensitive, that I took everything personally. Dad added I needed to listen better. I went to my room, lay on my bed, stared at the ceiling. Maybe they were right. Maybe I really did forget everything. Maybe something was wrong with me. Next day Mom asked why I was upset. I said because of yesterday. She frowned, said nothing happened yesterday. I opened my mouth, closed it, nodded. They looked at me like I was crazy. I started believing I was. 2 weeks later Dad mentioned at dinner, said I ruined the whole evening. I stood in the kitchen, holding a plate. So, it did happen. I started writing dates in a notebook. Time of conversation. What they said. Mom found the notebook 3 days later, held it in the kitchen. Dad stood next to her. Why are you writing this? I said to remember. She asked remember what? Our conversations. Mom looked at Dad. Dad said this was unhealthy behavior. They said normal people don't do this, that it was paranoid. That I was creating problems where there were none. Threw them in the trash. Said I needed to stop obsessing. I stood by the table, watched the paper fall into the bin. Dad said this was the last warning. That if he saw something like this again, there would be consequences. I nodded. They left. I pulled the pages from the trash that night. Smoothed them out. Hid them under the mattress. Next week Mom asked why I was acting so strange. I asked what I was doing. She didn't answer. Just shook her head and left. I started recording on my phone. Voice memos. Dated each one. First recording was at breakfast. Mom said I could take the car on Saturday. Dad agreed. I asked, are you sure? They said yes. Friday I asked what time. Mom frowned, said she never said that. I stood in the living room. She looked at me like I was lying. Dad came in, asked what was wrong. Mom said I was making things up again. I said she promised. She said I was mistaken. Dad said I needed to stop blaming them for my problems. I went to my room, opened the recording, played it. Her voice came through clear. You can take the car on Saturday. Dad's voice. Yeah, no problem. I listened 3 times, hands shaking. They lied. Or I was losing my mind. I didn't show them the recording. Something told me not to. Saturday I stayed home. Mom asked why I was so moody. I said no reason. She said I was ruining everyone's mood. I started recording every day. Every conversation that seemed important. Phone in my pocket. Recording always on. I listened to them at night. In headphones. Under the blanket. Half the conversations changed the next day. Mom would say one thing, then deny it. Dad backed her version every time. They never admitted they said it. Never apologized. Just looked at me like I was the problem. I asked Mom why she did this. She asked, did what? I didn't answer. Dad said I needed help. That I was becoming paranoid. Mom nodded. They made me an appointment with a therapist. Didn't ask if I wanted to, just said I was going Tuesday. Therapist asked what was happening at home. I said parents say things then deny them. She asked did I have examples. I told her about the car, about the dinner, about the notebook. She wrote things down, nodded, asked how I felt. I said I didn't know what was real. She said that must be hard. I didn't tell her about the recordings. After therapy, parents asked how it went. I said fine. Mom asked what we talked about. I said general things. She looked at Dad. Dad asked did I mention them. I said no. They looked at each other. Mom said good. Next week therapist called Mom. I didn't know until Tuesday. Mom asked why I told her about them. I said therapist asked about home. Mom said I was making them look like bad parents. Dad said I was ungrateful. They said I wasn't going back to therapy. That she clearly didn't understand me. That she was making things worse. I asked why they were canceling. Dad said because I wasn't accepting help. Mom added I just wanted to complain. I went back to my room, closed the door, sat on the floor. Phone recorded the whole conversation. I listened to it 5 times. They said I didn't mention them. But I didn't say that. I said general things. I played the recording again, my voice, their voices. I didn't lie. They changed what I said. I started recording even short conversations. Good morning. What's for dinner? When will you be back? Mom noticed the phone in my pocket Thursday, asked why I always had it with me. I said, in case of calls. She looked at me for a long time. Dad took my phone Friday. Said I spent too much time on it, that I needed a break. I asked when I'd get it back. He said when I showed I could live without it. I had no recordings, no proof. Just my memory against their words. Saturday, Mom said I could go to a friend's. I asked, are you sure? She said yes. Sunday. I asked what time I should be ready. She frowned. Said she never gave me permission. Hands balled into fists. I couldn't prove it. Mom asked why I was looking at her like that. I said nothing. She said don't lie to me. Dad came in. Asked what happened. Mom said I was acting strange again. I left the kitchen, went upstairs, locked the door. I had an old iPod in a drawer. Pulled it out, charged it. iPod worked. Voice recording app was still there. I put it in my hoodie pocket. Monday morning, Mom said I had a dentist appointment Wednesday. Dad added it was at 3. I nodded. Wednesday. I asked if we needed to leave. Mom looked at the clock, asked why. I have the dentist. She shook her head, said I didn't have any appointments. Dad sat at the table, reading the paper. Didn't even look up. I said you told me Monday. Mom said I was making things up again. I pulled the iPod from my pocket, played the recording. Her voice filled the kitchen. You have a dentist appointment Wednesday. Dad's voice. It's at 3. Mom froze. Dad looked up. Silence. Then Mom stepped forward, ripped the iPod from my hand. Threw it on the floor. Screen shattered. Pieces scattered across the tile. Dad stood up. Voice was quiet, cold. You were recording us. I stared at the broken iPod. Couldn't speak. Dad said this was a violation of trust. Mom said it was betrayal. I stood against the wall. They stared at me. Dad asked how long I'd been doing this. I didn't answer. He asked louder. Few weeks. Mom covered her face with her hands. Dad shook his head. They said I was sick. That normal kids don't do this. That I was destroying the family. Mom said she couldn't trust me. Dad said I proved I couldn't be trusted. I asked why do you lie? Mom looked at me like I hit her. Dad told me to go to my room. I didn't move. Asked again. Why do you say things then deny them? Dad stepped closer. Voice got louder. We don't lie to you. You lie to yourself. Mom added I was creating problems. That I'd always been dramatic. That I wanted attention. I went upstairs. They yelled downstairs. I heard every word through the door. Dad said I needed help. Real help. Mom agreed. I sat on my bed, looked at my hands. They were shaking. Next day they didn't talk to me. Morning Mom put a plate on the table. Didn't look at me. Left. Dad read the paper. I said good morning. He turns the page. I ate, washed the plate. Nobody said a word. Evening I asked what's for dinner. Mom kept cutting vegetables. Didn't answer. Dad turned on the TV. Volume was loud. I asked again. Mom drops the knife on the board. Looked at Dad. Dad muted it. She said she didn't know how to talk to me, that she didn't know who I was anymore. Dad nodded. I asked what that meant. Mom said I knew everything. I said I didn't. Dad stood up, left the room. Mom followed him. I stayed alone in the kitchen. Vegetables sat half cut. I finished cooking myself. They ate in their bedroom. I ate alone. Next 3 days were the same. They talked to each other, ignored me. If I entered a room, they went quiet. If I asked a question, they didn't answer. I felt like a ghost in my own house. Sunday my aunt called. Mom answered in the living room. I heard the conversation from the stairs. Aunt asked how things were. Mom said, everything's difficult. Aunt asked why. Mom said I was changing, that I'd become paranoid, that I was recording them without permission. Aunt asked, recording what? Mom explained about the conversations. Aunt was quiet for a minute, then asked why I was doing it. Aunt asked if it was true. Mom laughed. Of course not. She's just confused. Aunt said maybe she needs help. Mom said we tried. She refuses to accept the problem is her. Call ended 5 minutes later. Mom hung up. I came downstairs. Mom stood by the window. I asked, "You were talking about me?" She turned around, said Aunt was worried. I asked, "What did you tell her?" Mom said, "The truth." "What truth?" "That you're not well." I felt weight in my chest. Aunt had always been on my side. Now she'd think something was wrong with me too. Aunt said Mom told her what was happening. I didn't answer. She asked why I was recording conversations. I looked at Mom. Mom stared at her cup. Because they say things then deny them. Aunt frowned. Asked, did I have examples? I started telling her about the car. Mom interrupted. Said that never happened. Aunt looked at me, then at Mom, back at me. She asked maybe I mixed up the days. I said no. I had a recording. Dad said the recording was out of context, that I didn't understand what they actually meant. Aunt nodded. I realized I'd lost. They'd already convinced her. She didn't come to listen to me. She came to fix me. Aunt stayed until evening. Talked with parents quietly in living room. I sat upstairs, heard pieces through the vent. She's definitely experiencing stress. Dad's voice. Maybe something at school. Mom added I'd become withdrawn, that I didn't want to talk to them. Aunt said that was concerning. I lay on the floor, pressed my ear to the vent grate. Dad said they didn't know what to do, that every conversation turned into conflict. Mom said I blamed them for everything. Aunt asked had they tried family therapy. Dad said I refused to continue after the first time. That was a lie. They canceled the appointments. Mom said I didn't want help, that I just wanted to be right. Aunt sighed. Conversation lasted another hour. I listened to all of it. When Aunt left, she hugged me, whispered everything would be okay, that I just needed to trust my parents. I stood in the doorway, watched her get in the car, waved. Door closed. Mom and Dad walked past me, didn't even look. I went back to my room, pulled out the phone they returned this morning, opened the recordings folder. 43 files. 43 pieces of proof. Nobody wanted to listen to them. I started doubting the recordings. Maybe I was hearing them wrong. Maybe I was missing something. Next 2 days I listened to every file. In order. From the beginning. Each recording showed the same thing. They'd say something specific, then deny it the next day. There was no misunderstanding. There was no context I missed. They just changed their version. Friday Mom knocked on the door. I turned off the phone, hid it under the pillow. She came in, sat on the edge of the bed, stayed quiet for a long time, then said she and Dad made a decision, that I needed structure, that I'd lost sense of reality. I asked what that meant. She said they were taking the phone again, computer too, that I'd spend more time with them. No door to my room. No secrets, no recordings. I asked how long. She said until they saw improvement. Dad came in, held a box, put it on the bed. All electronic devices in here. I didn't move. Dad repeated it. Voice was firm. I pulled out the phone, put it in the box, computer next. Mom took the box. They left the room. Door stayed open. I sat on the bed, looked at the empty doorframe. First time in a month I cried. A week passed without phone, without computer, without door. They watched me all the time. Mom sat in the living room when I did homework. Dad checked what I was doing every hour. They talked to me now, asked questions. I answered in short phrases. Mom asked if I felt better. I said yes. She smiled. Dad asked if I understood why they were doing this. I said yes. He nodded. I didn't understand, but I learned to give the right answers. Wednesday they gave back the phone for 2 hours. Said it was a test. To see if I could handle it responsibly. I opened the recordings folder. All files were deleted. I looked at Mom. She was watching TV. I looked at Dad. He was reading a book. I didn't say anything. Closed the phone. Gave it back after an hour. Mom said she was proud of me. Dad said it was progress. Friday they put the door back. Said I earned it. That they saw changes. I thanked them. Closed the door. Sat on the floor. The recordings were gone. The proof was gone. Only my memory. And every day I started doubting it even happened. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel, like it, and click on the bell so you don't miss any more stories. See you soon.